Hello and welcome to another chapter in Developmental Psych 8 of 10. So we're nearing the end of the class, and probably at this point I should remind you about taking a look at the special assignment of the biography and the document that you have to create after that, which is the analysis or the reflection on the biography, where that's where you actually apply course content to understanding this person's life, or basically using this individual's life to explain some of what you learned in this class. And so the due dates for those are coming up in this compressed semester. We only have 3 weeks left, including this one. So content-wise, we're at midlife, chapter 8, which in many respects represents the largest in terms of the length. The longest stage in our lives is midlife, or the generativity stage. It's when we're doing our stuff, we're creating the self that we're going to have here on this earth. So let's start off here. Let's look at chapter 8 on middle adulthood. I said midlife, but middle adulthood. You're halfway there. Now, this is an interesting, to talk about middle adulthood and to talk about midlife. I'm 56. If this is my halfway point, I'm going to live to 112. There's no actuarial tables that would support that. I'm supposed to knock off the world right around 92 or something like that. So my halfway point was a while back, apparently. I'll fight that tooth and nail, but we'll see. So it's the sense of a halfway point is important, however, psychologically, in understanding that at some point we reach an age of realization where the reality of the end of our lives, as much as cognitively we've been able to put that together before this time, and based on individuals' experiences, we'll talk about midlife crises and the other times in life in which that can happen. But it is a point of time. You imagine yourself on a road, you're on a journey. Birth represents one end, death represents the other, and you're sort of halfway, and you're sort of, well, this is all the way I've come, and this is all the way I have to go. It's sort of a period of time of assessment to be looking at that. Now, one of the ways in which we first recognize this process of midlife is that suddenly we start to experience the physiological aspects of aging. Look at me. All the pictures that I have that are all over KV, if there's any pictures of me, it's all this dark brown hair. There's no denying it. It went white. Gravity wins. I have more lines on my face. Those kinds of things happen, and they drive us into that realization of, I am aging, and there is an end, and now's the time to sort of contemplate that. So what happens in terms of aging is we go through physiological changes, and those physiological changes are represented. First, we'll talk about normal changes, and then we'll talk about abnormal changes and why it's important to recognize that these are different. So normally, we have changes in hair color, hair texture, and the amount of it. Skin changes in terms of its elasticity, loses some of its elasticity, and that's where our wrinkles come from. Our muscle mass starts to go down. Our vision can undergo some changes. At one point I had to get reading glasses, and then finally I had to get regular prescription glasses. And hearing, it's hard for me to really judge this. I've always had bad hearing, but the acuity of our hearing, when you think about our neurons inside of our eyes and the neurons inside of our cochlea, they become brittle. They don't work as well. They've been trying to hear for a long time. They're just not as efficient. And we have normal reduction in visual acuity. We have normal reduction in night vision, where the bright lights at night overwhelm the neurons. The cones, which are picking up on color and detail, are overwhelmed by the rods that are picking up black and white and intensity. And sometimes people, as they age, have a hard time seeing and driving at night. And our hearing acuity can go down. Mine's been bad all my life, but I also, in addition to my regular hearing loss, am experiencing some aging portions of that as well. Now, all that said, these are the normal ones. The abnormal changes, now these are things, if these appear, these are not part of the normal physiological changes that everybody goes through. So we have, of course, increased incidence of heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, cancer, cholesterol. That lifestyle is starting to catch up on you. So if you've been, eating poorly, poor sleep habits, poor exercise habits, all of those, you are cashing in your chips now. So those neglects or those indulgences, the body as a young adult is much more able to tolerate that and bounce back. However, it is a debt that you accumulate. And when you reach into middle adulthood, some of that starts to come due. So that's important to recognize. What do we need to do not only in middle adulthood and in a response to these changes, but things you can do right now? How do you stay healthy? Well, first, there's activity, and then, of course, there's nutrition. These two things, these are the two balances of staying healthy, something that you probably should be working on right now in anticipation of my dire warning that if you are not doing these things as a young person, you will face the music when you become middle adulthood. And so, first, let's talk about activity. Simply walking. Taking the stairs. Don't drive just down the road when you can just walk. Those kind of things. Mow the lawn, or as in one I'm on a little weight maintenance program right now, and one of the things they talk about, one of the sayings is, take your dog for a walk every day, even if you don't have a dog. So I thought that's kind of a clever way to think about that. Go for that walk every day. Running, swimming, yoga. Some of these are, you represent, you look at swimming and yoga. These are low impact ways in which that we can, they don't jar the body as much. So very good for the aging body. And lifting weights. And this is not just for bodybuilding. This is for toning. And truthfully, all of your running and all of your cardiovascular and all those stuff, you will just enjoy life better if you're stronger. So regular lifting weights, going to the gym, they're super cheap now, or if you just buy a set of weights and do that on a regular basis, certainly going to go a long way. Now, in terms of nutrition, you lower your sodium, and this is not because sodium is bad. It's because sodium is in everything that we are eating and drinking right now. It's everywhere. So sodium's not a problem. It's the amount of sodium that is in a normal, quote-unquote, American diet is ridiculous. So we have to watch out for that. We have to watch out for fats and sugar. These two, the American diet is particularly full of these things. So we watch these things because normally our normal diet is we eat too much of them. Watch the snacking. And are you eating when you're actually hungry? You think you might be, and again, I'm transitioning this from this little weight maintenance program that I'm on right now, that oftentimes we think that we're hungry, but we're actually bored, lonely, tired. We feel like we should reward ourselves. We're having an energy dip, those kinds of things. And we might turn to foods that are not necessarily low in sugar, low in salt, low in fats. In fact, we'll be drawn to those kinds of food because they charge us up right away. They're very tasty. I love Doritos. You want to know why? Because they taste really good. And so for me to go for the Doritos, should be a little light going on saying you're probably not hungry. You're probably something else, probably thirsty. That's my thing. I don't drink enough. And so it might be something like that. But just these are habits that if you build them into your routine early in life, you would have less of those physiological things that are happening later in life. And if you're like me and late in life, then maintaining and creating these habits is good as well. So I've been fortunate that I've been athletic to some degree for my entire life, and I continue to be that way. So I enjoy a stronger self than I think if I had avoided those particular things. Now, another area of development that gets impacted in midlife and has become quite the topic of conversation and of certainly of interventions has been sexuality in midlife. That the changes that people undergo in midlife do affect their sexuality. So our sexuality, both men and women go through a process called climacteric, which is essentially midlife aging, a constellation of effects on the body that impact sexual functioning. Now for women, it's menopause. And menopause represents a hormonal change in the woman's body. Lasts about that period of transition from pre to post menopause is about a year, 12 months. And women have available to them through their doctor the ability to get hormone replacement, depending on how the development is happening, how the process is happening, how well the person is coping with it. The doctor might intervene and get involved in them. Now, for men may experience erectile dysfunction or challenge in achieving an erection in order for them to engage in sexual activity. This affects, or reported to affect, about 50% of men. However, 10 to 20% of that, it's psychological. Men have to realize that there is an incredibly, well, let me put it this way. The physiological aging of wrinkles and hair color and whatnot has produced a market for women of cosmetics, hair colors, liposuction, cosmetic surgery. It is to fight off the natural processes of aging. And we may, to a degree, participate in that. We may or may not agree with that. But certainly it's a billion and billions dollar industry staving off aging like it's the plague. For men, so for women, you have this eternal beauty, eternal youth expectation, which is ridiculous. And for men, there's this expectation of performance, being able to sustain an erection, to be able to be responsive, to be a sexual being, despite the fact that these natural aging things are happening. So keep in mind that socially there's these expectations for how people are supposed to be, which really don't correspond well with the realities of aging. So when I say 50% have erectile dysfunction, 50% might not have erectile dysfunction, but 50% may perceive that they are not meeting that unrealistic goal and then perceive that they have ED. Now, that said, there are medications available, there's all of those things, but there's also the psychology of that, an individual, that 10 to 20%. I mean, and that's what's being reported here. I'm gonna venture to guess that it might even be higher than that. But that's just my unfounded thought about that. The individual's expectations of their sexual performance is a huge part of their actual performance. So, if you can kind of think of it like stage fright, when someone is being called upon to respond, and, they're in the moment, but half of their mind is focused on, will my body allow me to participate in this kind of thing? And that worry and that concern can be just as troublesome and can result in performance problems just as much as any real erectile dysfunction. Now, how people approach that, how individuals who are going through, people in midlife, how do they approach dealing with these sexual changes? Well, first, recognizing that sexuality remains important, even though Sometimes the effect is that individuals lose interest. It's important to recognize, let's for the sake of argument, let's talk about this as a couple, two individuals that are together, to recognize, each one of them recognize, even though they may not be interested, that doesn't mean that the other person doesn't still have those needs. Now, a marriage or a union of two people does not necessitate that an individual has to be available and giving at all times at demand of their partner. That is not the way that works, or not the way it should work. But there can certainly be open conversations about each individual's needs and the importance for them to find a way to a middle ground. Let's say, for sort of middle is sort of the theme of this whole chapter here, midlife and middle adulthood and middle ground. So it remains important. We should be honest and open about our physiological limits, our physiological needs, time, effort, emotions, those kind of things. This is not a time to be quiet and just have that, well, they should know sort of quality. They should understand. And then the resentment builds up because maybe they don't understand, and maybe they don't know, and maybe they don't realize, and maybe it's important to talk about. Well, it's not maybe, it is important for them to be able to talk about things and talk about where you're feeling. So if an individual is feeling like the desire for physical activity, for sexuality, has gone down, it's important for them to communicate that. And that it's separate, let's say, even though it may have been very much a part of the quality of the emotional relationship between those individuals. See, those are very important things to talk about as they transpire. The individuals can explore options about how to be sexual with each other, or how to be intimate in different ways. And even in this world, there's even, what about an individual pleasing themselves, or that just watching, those kinds of activities. And it goes on from there. There's individuals that develop polyamorous relationships, or they have another partner, or maybe they find satisfaction in just taking care of themselves, and those kinds of things. But exploring what the options are, again, is that open and honest part, and then exploring and validating how individuals get their needs met. Now, this is not, again, it's not an opportunity for infidelity or for, chasing people all over the world. That's not the point. The point here is, in a relationship, those individuals having honest conversations about each other's needs. In fact, isn't that what having a relationship is all about? So you explore options. The passion can continue. There's ways in which people can be very close. Kind of look at this picture. These individuals, they're not engaged in sexuality. They're engaged in intimacy and passion. They're enjoying an environment. They're enjoying the touch and feel of each other's bodies. Those kinds of things they can be extremely, extremely satisfying. Next, we look at intimacy. And again, intimacy is a lot more, the actual term as we talk about it in this class, and I hope we've made that point pretty clear, has to do with knowing each other, getting to know each other's psychological beings, your spiritual beings, those kinds of things, and those become the areas of exploration. Physical intimacy, knowing somebody's body, knowing some of their parts, again, that's a place that people can go as well to explore the changing bodies of the individuals. Now, oftentimes individuals will feel a certain shame that they're not the lithe, beautiful, slim figure they were at one time, but yet those bodies are still lovable. They're still worthy of intimacy, affection, and attention. And so to explore that, to explore the changing bodies as people age, can be a form of intimacy that is new and exciting for those two people. And then finally, really looking at what does it mean to be in a committed relationship, and for individuals to reassert. Now, again, I'm talking about in committed in what would be a relationship that demands this, furthering that commitment, reestablishing, reaffirming that commitment to be together and go through this time together. Makes it a lot less lonely. Now, individuals who have someone to go through aging with, the romantic notion of aging together is exactly what we're talking about, is to be there with the individual while they are contemplating and dealing with the natural changes in their body that occur during middle adulthood and into late adulthood. And that commitment to be with each other through that is vitally important. Now, next, changing gears a bit, let's look at the psychology of what's going on and look at some of the information about the aging brain. So I've talked about the aging body, and of course part of the body is the brain. We already talked about some of the sensory things. Of course, that's related to the brain. At this point, we can introduce two concepts. One is crystallized intelligence, and the other one is fluid intelligence, and how these get affected by aging. Now, crystallized intelligence generally represents the facts, knowledge, and skills that we have attained over time, and fluid intelligence represents problem solving and the incorporation of new information. Or to put it more succinctly with how we've been talking about this throughout the class, is that fluid intelligence is more actively about assimilation and accommodation, as Piaget told us about very early in this course. Both aspects of these intelligence are available to people throughout their lives. There is some sense that crystallized intelligence remains constant throughout our aging, but we might lose our edge on fluid intelligence. Now, mind you, this varies. An individual's ability to problem solve, to incorporate new information, to modify their existing schemas, kind of think old dog, new tricks, kind of thing. Sort of a great analogy for assimilation and accommodation at this age. There is great variety within populations, probably more than between ages. So there are individuals that remain very active, very with it, very able to create and do creative solutions and problem solving throughout their lives. In fact, just like we exercise our bodies and just like we give good nutrition to our bodies, exercising your mind by exploring different ideas, continuing to read, taking classes, exploring intellectual pursuits, games, those kinds of things that require the brain to be active, of course, exercise that muscle that we call the brain. It's not really a muscle, but you know what I mean. So doing that helps us to maintain crystallized intelligence, probably okay, unless there's some sort of brain disease going on. Fluid intelligence, we need to keep that going. It's maybe a use it or lose it situation. However, even with that, let's look at these things. We have verbal memory, with a little bit of crystallized intelligence. There's spatial skills, inductive reasoning, meaning the application of logic to be in decision making, and vocabulary. Individuals in midlife actually perform better than in young adulthood. These things are skills that continue to build throughout the active brain's lifespan. Enter in the concept of flow and expertise. Now, I want to talk about these one at a time here. First, I'll talk about expertise, because these are going to be things that I'm having you talk about in the quizzes. So, expertise is the accumulated knowledge of a particular area. It could be your work, it could be your own life, it could be a skill that you have, such as boat building or something, and you have accumulated enough knowledge and experience, both of those things, and those things interact, that you are very good at the skill, you're very knowledgeable about the tools, you're knowledgeable about the options, you're a great problem solver, you're flexible. And when we encounter experts in their field, we know it. It is very clear. We may not like it sometimes, or sometimes we seek it out. We seek out experts. That's why we go see doctors, right? We assume that they're experts at that. We go see a mechanic because we assume that they're experts at that, and that they will see things more clearly than we do, and we take advantage of that expertise. Now there have been all kinds of studies and all kinds of thinking about how expertise develops as a combination of education, which I sort of perceive as condensed experience, and then of course experience itself, having done something for a given amount of time. Now, how insightful that becomes in terms of creativity means someone could become really good at a task, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've been thinking about the task or problem solving about the task or something like that. They might not have that enriched sort of creativity that comes with that expertise. They're still experts at doing the task, but they don't have that sort of enhanced knowledge. That takes active development. So when we talk about individuals becoming lifelong learners in their fields, each one of you is going into a field and you're going to continually be learning new things. In fact, it'll keep the job interesting, it'll keep your life interesting, and it is truly the kind of process, that assimilation and accommodation of schemas, that makes you an expert. And I hope that when you encounter individuals that have lots of education and lots of experience, that you value them as the experts that they are. Learn from them what you can. They're not offering perfection. That's a very important, quality to recognize. They're not offering perfection, but they are offering expertise. Now, the other one, flow. Flow is a state of mind in which individuals lose themselves within a task. We really don't have to go any deeper than that because you've probably all experienced it. You might have been involved in a deep conversation. You might have been involved in a hobby, or maybe you're lucky enough to have a job where you can get really immersed in what you're doing and the time flies. You just start doing it and then suddenly it's time to go home. The day's over. You've been at it for hours and you sort of lost yourself in that. That sense of getting deeply immersed in a task is and has been identified as kind of the doors to creativity, the doors to expertise, the doors to really, really excellent performance. Now, when I first heard about this, it was in a very different context. It was in the context of sports, of individual sports, athletics, elite athletes. In particular, we are about to see another Olympics. Hopefully it stays safe. But in Tokyo, we're going to be seeing people deeply, and I think this is maybe why I like watching sports like that, deeply in the sense of flow, of very deep concentration on what they're doing, so that their creative movements, in this case, in many aspects, athletics, have a flow to them. There's a grace and an elegance. And that grace and elegance, which I think is really kind of neat to take from that word flow, like water flowing, it's smooth. Sometimes it's crashy, but it's moving. And there's this sense of great accomplishment that can happen with that. Now, these things are not absent. They're available to individuals throughout the lifespan, but need to be nurtured and supported, not only physiologically, not only nutritionally, but psychologically and in terms of relationships, individuals working to help each other maintain the capacity for expertise and flow. Now, when we're looking at this stage and we think about Erickson's term for this stage, generativity, and we think, what are we going to generate? What is our life purpose, our life work? We often think about work itself, like the actual job that we have. Now, contextually, this pandemic has certainly created a challenge to individuals' work life, but it actually made I put this slide to represent work at midlife because this was sort of my dream, to be able to work on a boat or, just to be, doing my fun things while I'm doing. This has become a much more common reality. Might not be a boat. I'm not sitting in a boat right now. I'm sitting in the top of my garage. But working at home and having that kind of flexibility and those kinds of things, what does work in late life look like? And here we have to recognize this transition from first of all, the importance of work itself in our lives as Americans. When we are, this might be the 18th time I say this, but when we meet somebody, we often ask them who their name is, and that's a social recognition of status related to their name. And then very often we ask, well, what do you do? Meaning, what's your job? Because I'm interested in determining your status compared to me, which I will then use to regulate the way in which I talk to you. So we do that as part of the rituals of meeting people for the first time and getting to know them. Not the be-all, end-all, but it's certainly one of the factors that we use to evaluate somebody's status. So this particular aspect of our lives is pretty important. We recognize that. And so first it's important, and then there's a lifespan of our job or our work, our career, the different jobs that we've had, maybe changes in career fields. We might have been in retail and then we're now in healthcare, those kinds of changes. It has its lifespan. And just as midlife is about having expertise, we have this social expectation that the middle-aged individuals, the individuals in middle adulthood, are advanced along in their fields. They're experts in their fields. Maybe they're supervisors. Maybe they're running their own business. Maybe they're, those individuals. Not that it doesn't happen before that, and not that it doesn't happen in late adulthood. But this is sort of this expectation. If you're on the job and you've been on the job for a long time, even if you're doing the same job as your younger peers, there would be an expectation of deference. Well, let's ask Mark. Mark's been doing this for longer than I have. That sort of social expectation of expertise on the job itself. Now, as individuals are aging, and we're looking at the longest stages, so I talked a little bit about the beginning. We're becoming experts. We're in the middle of this very long stage, and now we're looking at, what are we good at work and our ability to pass on information to the next generation. Maybe we're the one picked to be the individual who orients the new people coming in, those kinds of things, because we know our job well. Maybe we're supervisors, those kinds of things. And then as we approach the end of midlife in our job lifespan, we might be starting to encounter some of the effects of our physiological health, psychological health on the ability to maintain our jobs. So here we have this picture here working at midlife, but what are some of the challenges that we might face in terms of continuing to work into, let's say, the later half of the halfway point? So there's experiencing a glass ceiling. Maybe we might have not taken the opportunity when we could have. We might be experiencing, we want to move up in the company or want to move up in status. We can see, that's what they mean by the glass ceiling. We can see others doing it, but we're experiencing a barrier in that company because of our age. We have a little bit of ageism going on there. We might be, conversely, we might be burning out of our job. Now, burnout is obviously we can burn out of almost anything that we're doing continually, but it's a recognition of the fact that I'm not being rewarded by what I'm doing. Now, whatever it is, I can get burned out of a hobby. I can get burned out in a relationship when the information I'm getting back is unsatisfying and I am equally unable to bring about change. Now, that's an important quality in burnout. Something not being satisfying and not giving you the kudos, that's only half of it. And that might be sufficient to change your job. However, one of the things that really is characteristic of burnout and emotional anxiety associated with this is the fact I would like things to change. I think they should change, maybe be better if they change, but I don't have the ability to bring out those changes myself. A sense of powerlessness. Now, that powerlessness really relates to, it's one of the characteristics, the emotional expression of powerlessness is one of the characteristics of what we call depression. So this is more than I don't like my job and it's not giving me anything. It's a depression that is associated with your job. Individuals in burnout, okay, this is just a scenario, but a typical scenario is they go to bed at night, they may sleep through the night, but they get up in the morning and the dread begins. Like, the day has started, now I need to get prepared for work. And they become increasingly stressed as they go to work. Now, that experience really should inform that individual that they're experiencing some burnout. And that's a normal experience for people. And to recognize, maybe I need to explore ways that I'm not aware of right now regarding my choices that are in front of me and seek out some assistance with that. But burnout is one of the challenges that someone might start experiencing during this time of their lives. There could be economic downturns. I mean, certainly our current pandemic has created a situation where individuals became unemployed, they had challenges financially. Maybe their industries are gone now. That's really, really some of the things that are going to be happening here. I mean, we're really looking at a situation where we are currently engaged in the largest psychological study in history, and that is the collective work that is being done on the impact of this pandemic on all aspects of people's lives, on how they learn, how they interact with others, the importance of technology, the pros and cons of technology, economic changes, political division, all of these things. You look at the, not that we would want circumstances to come along, but the world of science has been primed, and here we have this opportunity to study how these affect people across the lifespan, but certainly during this time when, figuratively speaking, when I'm in that halfway point, it's sort of a decision-making point that I'll get to in just a moment in terms of the crisis, the midlife crisis experience or midlife event, where we're asking ourselves, if I'm going to make a change, I better make it now because I'm going to run out of time. I need to make that now. And that sort of pressure comes in. And you think about that in terms of an economic downturn might force somebody. Think of Marcia's theory that this may take someone who's in an achieved identity in terms of their work and force them into moratorium. Or maybe it forces them into, it's on the back burner. They're depressed by it. My new status of unemployed is foreclosed, but now I have to start looking for new work, and how frustrating that can be because of, a mass event like the pandemic. We might engage in overworking, spending more and more time. Maybe there's less things going on at home, so we fill up our empty space with work. We might develop a sense of urgency regarding that, and the struggle to create balance between our work lives and our personal lives, taking care of our bodies and whatnot. Oftentimes when I'm talking to individuals about developing healthy habits related to exercise and eating and whatnot, there's a sense of, how am I supposed to fit this in my schedule? And it's really, it's not a matter of fitting it into your schedule. It's recognition that these things are actually more important than your schedule. To maintain your health and to do at least some of those things is going to need to be a higher priority. And so that prioritization is really the first part of time management. And then there's a matter of, how do I, what do I sacrifice? How far am I willing to go toward health, and how far am I willing to let go in terms of my achievement at work, and finding that sort of balance that's there and being creative about that. So all of this, of course, is all part of this generativity. Let's take a look at that. Here we have the figure from Erickson's. And you see it on the bottom here, kind of a dark blue, middle adulthood, generativity versus stagnation. And the stagnation word is really interesting. This is an individual who, on the psychiatric side, on the psychodynamic viewpoint of Erickson, you see generativity, meaning I am in the age that I'm producing. The stagnation part, the stagnation option along that continuum, has to do, in its original format, with a fixation on youth. Midlife, as I've been talking about in terms of physiological and psychological changes, presents us with an unerring image that we are aging. Now, individuals may fixate on that. They might fixate on, I want to not age, and as impossible that is, that's why it's a fixation. They would then engage in activities denying their real aging that's going on. Now, to a degree, fighting off aging, and let's say, someone realizes their hair is going gray and they're like, okay, I'm going to start exercising, I'm going to join the team, I'm going to do, I'm going to do all these, knock yourself out. I mean, that's all healthy things to do. But stagnation really refers to an individuals who really cannot accept the fact that they're going into an aging time of their lives, and may, in the sort of stereotypical way, may return to a way of thinking much more reminiscent of adolescence. Egocentric, not taking into considerations the feelings of others, the personal fable, the sense of invulnerability, individual taking risks, and individual could make decisions such as what we might see in a, movie type midlife crisis where Bob leaves his wife to go date a 20-year-old Trixie and gets a Mercedes and an earring. That kind of, like, I'm going back, I'm going to make irresponsible decisions because I fear death. Now, that dynamic in that dichotomy of generativity versus stagnation, that stagnation is that sense of I can't age, and you're stuck. You become stuck in this, whereas generativity is really supposed to be the generating. I mean, think about the power of the stage. This is really where you're getting stuff done. You have enough experience and expertise that you can really have impact, whether it's at your job or your family or whatever. For example, I was a father during my young adulthood into the beginning of midlife. I became a grandfather in midlife. I am a expert grandfather, way better. I learned all those things from failing as a parent and then got better at it. And so my grandparenting skills are honed to expertise. Those kinds of differences that can happen. So it's not just in work, but it's an opportunity. And the individual who goes through a crisis, let's say, that midlife crisis, may be fixating on the loss of their youth. Now, that can manifest itself in many ways. We've seen it in the cosmetic industry and the obsession with eternal youth. And we're starting to see it rising again with men in terms of the preponderance of claims of erectile dysfunction, and all the ads that you can see right now about testosterone pills and whatnot that bring back your youthful vigor and stuff like that. They're catching a wave of anxiety associated with the loss of youth, which is really much more representative of stagnation than it is of generativity. And so we can keep that in mind. Now, in terms of crisis, when I talk about crisis in this class, I really like, and one of the reasons I introduced James Marcia's work on identity statuses, is that I really like his use of the word crisis. Now, crisis there is not, I need a new medication. It's, I'm looking at the options. That's what crisis means in that theory. And it's the presence or absence of that process that determines each one of those 4 cells in which is in there. You're either in crisis or you're not. And so when we're looking at the options and we approach that in terms of using that word crisis in the phrase midlife crisis, we can move away from the idea of the, going out with Trixie thing that we see in the movies. And so nothing about people named Trixie. That's just the name I came up with. So when we look at crises like that, we look at points in our lives in which we are making those decisions. Midlife is a good point to talk about because we sense our aging, and there's this really internal process of evaluation. Am I on the right path? Am I going to create the legacy that I want? Is my ladder of success leaning against the right building? Do I need to make a change because now I'm aware that my time is limited in a way that I wasn't aware prior to that? Now, that doesn't mean that kind of epiphany of decision-making can't happen at other points in our life. In fact, along our pathway, we may come across lots of events or crises that indicate that we need to make some changes. I mean, certainly I've met, just as an example, I know an individual who was living the wild life, drinking a lot, driving, drugging, doing all that, was involved in a car accident, and the car accident killed his best friend who was with him in the car. Now, that event, having occurred when in his 20s, was profound in terms of shaping that individual's life and the decisions they made from that point on to no longer pursue that lifestyle. So we can look at those kinds of events in early life, someone dying, a disease process, a near-death experience of our own, a world crises. I mean, there may be individuals who are surviving the pandemic right now who have changed what's important in life. Maybe, for example, someone was forced to go home to work, forced to go home and work at home, and then has now entered into a period of time where they're like, I felt I was just as productive. I think I like this better balance for me of being at home and doing work. Other individuals may miss the office and they want to go back to that, and it reaffirms or maybe affirms for the first time their need to be with other people as they're involved in their work. And you'll see how this event, regardless of your age, has come along and has caused you to contemplate and make changes or make, evaluations and whatnot. So It happens a lot with many things in midlife. Sometimes we make changes. Sometimes we're confirming that everything's okay. So along these different pathways, maybe each one of these representing a crisis or an event or a midlife event, midlife crisis sort of thing that's happened in our lives along the way. Each, wherever we are, when we have a crisis, it impacts all these areas. Anything that's in moratorium, we feel more pressure. Anything that's foreclosed, we might question. Anything that's diffused, it's got to get off the back burner, and I need to make the effort to move these things into achievement. So think of when a crisis comes along that is sometimes independent of many things. Let's say the pandemic has resulted in you losing your work. And so you think about the ways that has impacted. Maybe you were already looking for work, so work was already in moratorium, but maybe it was achieved. You loved what you did. It was an achieved aspect of your identity, and now that's moved into moratorium, and but you're thinking differently about your work in order to move from that into a new achieved identity related to work. But think about family. Maybe right up until now, the expectation was people will go to work, and then they would send the kids off to daycare or school and stuff like that. Now you come home, you were sort of foreclosed into that idea that others are going to take care of your kids while you're at work. And now that you have been taking care of your kids alone, suddenly you're thinking, I think I want to do this. Maybe I need to make some changes in terms of our household income, how much money we want coming in, so that I can stay at home and take care of my kids. Maybe that's going to affect my future work choices. Maybe that pathway that I was on, which I got derailed, and now I'm taking care of my kids, but I like taking care of my kids, I like being at home, so maybe I'm going to find a new rail. Maybe I'm going to find a new pathway that enables me to work and take care of my kids at the same time. You get where I'm going here? This is the way something can come along, and they can take all aspects of our identity, whether they're in moratorium, achieved, foreclosure, or diffused, and they can raise them to the surface. We become very, very aware of that. Maybe, just as my last example, just occurred to me, so I was trying to think of something in diffusion. Maybe you haven't been setting money aside. Retirement's a long ways, but now with the added financial pressure, you're like, wow, having a nest egg, having a couple $1,000s even just set aside for when things like this come about would have been really nice. And maybe that what used to be on the back burner is now front burner. Let's start making those changes to my life. Okay, so these are the, things that happen: moratorium, identity, diffusion, foreclosure, any aspects of your pieces that are in there might go to achievement. And I probably should have put, arrows on both sides. It can also lead to things that are in achievement going into moratorium, going into diffusion. It just shuffles the deck, as they might say. So let's look at the assessments for this particular chapter. We have the first one, a discussion on expertise and flow. We're representing your own experiences, and if you want to include them, of course, the experience of others and the experience of the individual that you're interviewing for your biography, talking about expertise and times that you have performed at very, very high level. And then for the quiz, I'm asking you to think about and discuss with your subject midlife events. When they're at this typical age of midlife, or maybe there were things that happened before, they will know that. You simply have to say, was there any time in your life where, things really changed? Something happened and it changed your life. Each one of us can list those pretty readily. They're incredibly important parts of our lives, and our memory validates that. Their memory, they will remember those things. It was the divorce, the death, the war, So whatever it is, those events, and discuss some of those in the quiz and relate some of those in the quiz. In fact, this is one of those concrete areas where I'm giving, when you're doing the reflection paper, you can put midlife events and talk about this as one of the things that you learned about. One of the answers that you can use on your reflection paper for the bio is certainly these examples that you'll be coming up with for this particular quiz. So that's it for the longest stage in our life. That was the middle adulthood, and I look forward to seeing your work in the discussions and in the quizzes. So have a great week.